So we're going to get the show underway. And yesterday we talked a lot about the issues, and that's really important because we've got to sort of air them up and sometimes see the commonalities, and that can help us come to solutions. Today, while we're still going to sort of identify problems, we really want to focus on what is the way ahead. So everyone walks out of this conference feeling like they've got some pretty decent tools to make things better, I guess, basically. So yesterday we talked about the importance of linking positive economic outcomes with increased investment in the social services sector. The reality is that the people who hand out money like numbers. So the more numbers you can bring in there to make your case stronger, the better it is. And our next speaker is very good at that. So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for day two, Dr. Richard Dennis. Richard is the Executive Director of the Australian Institute. He's a prominent Australian economist, author and commentator. Today he's going to take us through why changing the current economic narrative is imperative and the important but undervalued role that the social service sector plays in keeping our economy ticking over, demanding of greater recognition, stewardship and investment from the powers that be. Investment, he argues, that is long overdue and eminently affordable. Please welcome Richard.
Thanks very much, Dee, and thanks everyone for having me along today. It's always exciting to start the day hearing from an economist, isn't it? I mean, bet you told your kids this morning, what's going on today, folks? Oh, I have to talk to an economist to get my heart racing. Well, I'm going to make you angry before I try and make you happy, because let's face it, the care sector in Australia has not just been much neglected for many decades, but let's be crystal clear, it's been neglected by design. And I want to give you a glimpse into just how, for many people, everything at the moment, all the problems that you talked about yesterday, are fine. Okay? Because Australia's one of the richest countries in the world. And we're not fixing some problems, and we are fixing other problems. So let's not think other people are stupid. Let's be worse than that. Let's think other people know what they're doing. So I'm going to tell you a true story. I have a great job. By the way, I'm now the Executive Director again. So apologies for the confusion in my career movements, but I've been remoted, a term I didn't know existed. But true story, I have a fun job. I get to talk to lots of people. And every now and then I get to talk to people who, perhaps might not fit comfortably in this room. And I was invited many years ago to go to a retreat where CEOs and high-paid people were learning to cope with the stresses of being rich. You laugh, it cost a lot to go to this retreat, and because I've written books about how money doesn't buy happiness, they thought, oh, let's pay the guy that writes about how money doesn't buy happiness to come and be provocative, which is a dangerous thing to ask me to be. So I was talking to this group, about a dozen people, mainly men, few women, very high paid, all of them, stressful lives, stressful jobs, very hard being rich, And I said to them, who here uses pay to motivate their staff? Oh, yes. And who here thinks, if you don't pay good wages, you won't have the, right. And who here uses bonuses to, right, okay. Anyone here got a kid in childcare? A few hands went up. How do you feel about the fact that your kids are being cared for by the lowest paid people in the country? Pause, a bit like that. One guy said, good. I feel good. I said, why is that? He said, well, I don't want my kids getting cared for by someone motivated by money. Oh, we're not finished yet. I said, you mean someone like you? And he said, yeah. Own that. That's what you're up against. He likes the fact that loving, caring people wake up, jump out of bed in the morning, go and care for his kids because they love looking after kids. Why are you laughing? This is not the funny bit of the story. This is why women in particular get low wages in the care sector, because a whole bunch of people think that's proof that all is well, that everyone is in the jobs they should be in, that the greedy rich, words I shan't use in polite company, are getting paid a lot of money because they know they wouldn't help anyone, ever, but they'll work their ass off for a lot of money, and it cheers them up to think that childcare workers and aged care workers and nurses and teachers aren't paid that much, because that's proof that the right people are doing the right jobs for the right reasons. So if you think that everyone out there agrees that we should pay the care sector much higher wages, I hate to tell you, you are wrong. You are wrong. That's the first thing that you're wrong about. And by the way, just to be clear, I don't agree. I'm not here to tell you to accept low wages. I'm here to tell you why and what you're up against in the care sector generally. So let's call that fact one. Here's fact two. In Australia, we like to tell ourselves that the economy, I'm an economist so I can talk confidently about this, but most of it's nonsense. The economy is kind of based on people making things. And it's usually men doing blokey men stuff, and there's miners mining away, and there's builders building away, and that's the backbone of the economy. Well, that's just crap. There's 25 million people in Australia, 40,000 of them work in coal, 100,000 people work at McDonald's. Uniting Care and Anglicare employ more people than the entire coal industry, but no one would ever call the care sector the backbone of the economy. Oh, but you can't have an economy without mining. What, like Singapore? No. You know how much mining they do in Japan? None. I'm not anti-mining. It's just an activity. Right? It's a thing. And you dig some stuff up and you sell it to people. That's one way to create jobs. That's one way to create exports. That's one way to do things. But you know what most countries in the world lack? A backbone, or a mining industry, depending on your perspective. Right? It's just nonsense. Okay, so we know that the care sector isn't really important. The manufacturing sector and the mining sector, the blokey jobs, they're the important ones. We know that, right? We know that the service sector isn't quite as important. And that's why people don't get paid much in the service sector except lawyers, except doctors, except the advertising industry, except sportsmen, some of the highest paid people in the country who earn more than sportswomen. So do we really believe that only people that make things can earn decent wages? Police seem to earn a lot more than nurses. Service sector? It's just all crap. You're being gaslit. None of it's true. The former head of the ACCC, Rod Sims, spoke at a conference the Australia Institute organised recently, a revenue summit in Canberra, and Rod made a really simple but important point. Rod's job used to be, he's a professor of economics now, but his job used to be to chair the competition watchdog in Australia. And economists do like competition because we don't really like monopolies. When people are in a monopoly position, they tend to exploit what we call their market power. And that's true of Google, that's true of Facebook, and it's also true of governments who are effectively, and this is Rod Sims, the former chair of the competition watchdog, making this argument, governments are exploiting the fact that as the dominant employer of the service sector, they've kept wages down. In the same way that Google pushes prices for advertising up because that's profitable, and in the same way that Facebook pushes the prices up. And when people have market power, they tend to use it. And according to the former competition watchdog in Australia, governments have got into the habit of using their market power to suppress wages, to keep them low. Now, this gets to the key point, how if we wanted to invest in the care sector, and that's a big if, right? I do, but if we as a society wanted to invest in the care sector, if we wanted to have better wages and better conditions for the people who work in it, better outcomes for the kids, for the sick people, for the old people, for the disabled people who use it, if we, one of the richest countries in the world, wanted to invest more in the care sector, we could. But we haven't. And the gaslighting doesn't just start with or end with the stories about, the economy. You've heard countless times that, well, if you wanted more money from the government, you would have to prove that you were going to increase your productivity, that you were going to, deliver benefits to it. You would have to pay an economist to come and by the way, these things can help, but stick with me, that in order to deserve government support, you would have to make a case, an evidence-based case, which you should, but stick with me. That's not how the National Party got money. We know in the lead up to the last election that the previous government committed $20 billion, $20,000 million, $20 billion to get the National Party to agree that Scott Morrison could go to Glasgow and say the words net zero. The Inland Rail project, which is going to make a railway line from Melbourne to Brisbane, not up the coast the way it currently goes, but inland, the Inland Rail project was supposed to cost $5 billion. The cost-benefit analysis said, it's not very good. I don't think we should go ahead. And guess what they did anyway? They went ahead. You know what the latest estimate for what it's going to cost is? $15 billion. But it's okay. When Barnaby Joyce was challenged with the fact that the cost had blown out by 300%, he said, yeah, that means it'll create even more jobs. Now, that's how powerful people get money. That's how powerful people get money. It's quite different, isn't it? Remember we were going to buy 12 new submarines to replace the 6 we never used? But then it turned out they weren't good enough. So now we need 12 nuclear submarines. $250 billion. I guarantee you there was no cost-benefit analysis. There was no economic modelling. And when the Treasurer was asked, can we afford this? I'm quoting verbatim here, you know what he said? You can always afford it if it's a priority. And that's the takeout. Okay, we're one of the richest countries in the world. We're living at the richest point in world history. Even after the COVID crisis, Australia has low levels of debt, has low levels of tax, and we're about to spend another $250 billion on income tax cuts that go overwhelmingly to high income earners such as disability workers, aged care workers, childcare workers. Remember, because we're worried there's staff shortages at the moment, yeah? So giving rich blokes a tax cut will do what to help? Literally nothing. But that's okay, because that's how it really works. It doesn't have to work this way. Other countries are smarter than us. Other countries are different than us. It's often said that tax is the price we pay to live in a civilised society. We just don't buy a lot of civilisation in Australia. The care sector is literally proof of our investment in civilisation. Other countries do exist. Other countries do it different. Anyone here heard of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland? Yeah, they're real, right? I've been there. It's not hypothetical. It's not utopian. They exist. They collect more tax than us. They spend a lot more money on services than us. They're richer than us. They're happier than us. They also have Russia right next door, and they have a more independent foreign policy than us. And they spend less on defence than us. The Australian Institute did a survey recently, and we surveyed Australians about their fears of invasion from China and the Taiwanese fear of invasion from China. You know who was more afraid? I'm not kidding. Taiwan's 200 miles from mainland China. Australians are more afraid that China's coming to get us. We're about to spend $250 billion on nuclear subs. Can we invest more in aged care? No. Why not? Money doesn't grow on trees. Well, it does for some. So sorry to make you angry. Now I want to make you happy. There's nothing to stop us fixing this. Nothing to stop us fixing this. And it's not on you to fix it, but it is on you to believe that the care sector, the service sector, is just as important as any other bit of the economy. That paying blokes a lot of money to run around and tackle people doesn't mean they're making a bigger contribution to society than people caring for our mums. That's just ridiculous. Sure, we have a mining industry, that's not evil, that's not the end of the world, but it's not the backbone of anything. It just produces a lot of profit and not a lot of jobs. We happen to be one of the lowest tax countries in the developed world. We're about to become a lower tax country by choice. No one held a gun to our heads. Right? And England was going to cut taxes and they changed their minds. Will we change our minds in Australia? Dunno. Will we stick with the subs? Dunno. But the fun part, the important part, is these are democratic questions. They've got nothing to do with economics. There's nothing in any economics textbook that can help an individual or a society decide how much you should spend on dinner, how much you spend on shoes, or how much we as a society want to spend on our health system, or how much we as a society want to spend on our care system. It's just what kind of stuff we want. And if you want to give rich blokes tax cuts and keep spending as little as we can on the care sector, we can do that. No one's going to stop us. It's got nothing to do with economics. So to conclude, there's lots of, and I can share it with you or your peak bodies anytime you want, there's lots of overwhelming data that says investing in aged care, investing in childcare, investing in healthcare creates a lot more jobs than building inland railway lines or giving tax cuts to rich blokes. But the data's overwhelming. And it's there. It already exists. But what doesn't exist is a narrative that actually asks, how come year after year we find money for tax cuts for high income earners and we can't find money for our care sector? They're the simple questions that we have to keep asking. And we have in the past improved things. Right? There's no doubt. I mean, look what the Gillard government did with investing in childcare wages. It worked. It's not complicated. Right? We just had to pass a bill. Just needed a majority of both houses of parliament. And that's where the money grows on the tree. And if someone's worried about the budget deficit, just tell them to scrap the stage 3 tax cuts. Or tell them to scrap the inland railway line. Or tell them to solve go cause someone else some grief. But don't ever, ever believe that there's not enough money. When you hear a politician say we can't afford to do something, all you've heard them say is, I'd rather do something else. And it's up to us. That's just a democratic question. It's up to us to decide what those priorities are. And I think it should be the care sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. And yes, I think there's this broader conversation we need to have is about the word tax. We have to stop making tax a dirty word. And both political parties do it. Tax cuts are good, tax is bad. And it's just not true. If you think of some of the greatest achievements in Australian history, like Medicare, it comes as a levy on your tax, and we're all really proud of it. And you mentioned the countries like Norway, Sweden, they have highest taxes. They also have the highest happiness index. That's not a coincidence, but I think where it works is they trust the government to deliver good social services, and there's that trust element, and we talked about it a lot yesterday. And we have a deficit of trust in governments, often for a whole lot of good reasons. But it might be if we start seeing things, and governments talk about your tax has brought this, your tax has done this, instead of governments taking, we've done this, remind people it's their taxes that have done that, and then maybe, just maybe, we can stop tax being a dirty word. It's also, I think, this idea that it's not, this idea that people should be doing things because they love doing things. It's not just politicians who think that. It's often in the sector there's pushback against wanting to be seen to be asking for more money. And I know this, I did the New South Wales Teachers campaign at the moment, More Than Thanks. It's like, we want, more than thanks isn't enough. And some of the people are like, oh, we don't want to seem like we're asking for money. It's like, because you are asking for money. It is okay to be asking for money. There's a great Tim and Debbie skit. I don't know how many of you are from the 80s. But it was Tim going to Debbie, money doesn't buy you happiness. And Debbie says, I don't know, I saw a guy in a Mercedes the other day. He looked really fucking happy. We are going to ask whether anyone from the audience has questions for Dennis, as I'm sure they... for Richard. I'm going Richard Dennis. RD. If anyone has questions for Richard, I then had to look down again. Please put your hand up and we'll put a mic. We do, right at the back.
I'll always have a question because I like to learn.
I'll let you have the lectern.
Margaret from Westia and Chair of LCSA. One of the things I think really needs some work on is the business industry codes. I actually feel that social assistance needs to be separated out from healthcare. Have you got any... We've had those BICs in place for so long. Do you think there's something that could be done around that? I've been told there may be some reviewing being done.
Look, I confess to not having much expertise in that at all. I guess I would say that it's always good to have bargaining power. So working as a big group, I suggest, is better than working as a small group, but your group has to be coherent. You actually have to have aligned interests and aligned priorities. So, yeah, I don't want to speculate about where those boundaries should be drawn, but big picture, I think the care sector's got a lot in common. It needs more revenue from collecting tax on people like me so we could spend more money on the services you work on. And I think it's possible to have very big, broad campaigns around that are, I think, quite popular, but how individual sort of parts of the industry organise themselves.
It's about the delineation of wages between social assistance and health is my argument why they probably should be divided, but I also see the crossover. And I actually don't see that unity because in the health you're arguing for, sometimes substantially higher wages than what the social assistance sector has. And just on Dee's comment, I remember when I was doing marketing in my Master of Community Management, we had the guy that started SIDS, who was a marketing lecturer at UTS, that talk about some of the times we're scared to say no because of our attitude to salespeople in Australia. So we ask for things and money is seen as really something we shouldn't ask for, where in other cultures they're quite happy to ask for money.
Yeah. I think particularly now it is a really reasonable ask to say an essential worker should be able to buy a house within 30 k's of where they're working. That just becomes a really reasonable argument, I think, for people. And I think the good thing that we've seen in the last couple of years is the support of parents for childcare workers and for school teachers, apart from that terrible man you met. But by and large, most people have been very supportive because anyone who spends time with young children knows anyone who does it for a living earns every fucking penny.
Richard, g'day. John's my name over here from Shelter. Thanks very much for your cut-through presentation. I read this morning where David Pocock is negotiating, it would seem, to have some of the $100 million worth of debt that the ACT government would otherwise pay for public housing forgiven in return for some other passage of legislation. And I think Jackie Lambie managed to do the same thing in Tasmania. What's your thoughts on that sort of thing? Is that too clever by half? Is that running with dogs to get fleas? Like, what's the moral sort of compass on that sort of stuff?
Look, I'm a Senate tragic. I think that I think senators should and do use power when they get the chance, and it's his job to do that. It's just more visible when a crossbencher does it. When a backbencher in a government does it, it's a bit less visible. But let me just make a quick point. In Australia, we know that with housing, we couldn't possibly have public housing. It's way too expensive. It would never work. Except, of course, for soldiers, where we have something called the Defence Housing Authority, which is, of course, just a high-status version of public housing. It's public housing. Just we don't call it public housing because that's a low-status term. We call it the Defence Housing Authority, and it provides housing services for defence personnel. Are they public servants? Yep. But they're high status male ones, right? And, you know, Defence Housing Authority makes a profit. Right? It buys land, it builds houses, it puts defence personnel in them, it rents it to them, and it sells the house and makes profit. Could we have a nurses' housing authority? Yep. Could we have a teachers' housing authority? Yep. Are we going to? No. It's not complicated. And it's not even ideological. Right? Google it, Defence Housing Authority. It's a thing. Works a treat. And you know what? We don't have to have the Teachers and Nurses Housing Authority. This is going to blow your mind. We could have the Housing Authority. We could just actually... What is a property developer? It's someone who can buy land, get it rezoned, borrow some money, subcontract some construction. Is this a task beyond the nation state? No. Is it very profitable to let the private sector do it? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't blame David doing that, but I hope he pushes for even more.
Any other questions? We've got one down here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed listening to your refreshingly honest talk. I mean, without saying it out loud, you're really talking about sexism here.
Mm-hmm. I thought I did say it out loud.
Well, yeah,
I said the men were gaslighting you.
Well, actually, you're okay. Good. So you know this is overt sexism. It's in our face, but we don't get. And not only that, because of the sexism, we then have a lot of women who cannot afford, because of their low pay, to escape domestic violence relationships and all sorts of issues from the low pay. So I'm just wondering, what is the answer to get this out, to get it out into government that this is overt sexism? Because I don't think they quite get it. What's your advice?
Well, you're asking the wrong guy, because I've been trying to make people angry for 20 years and I haven't achieved much yet, but maybe today's the day. No, I mean, I don't know. It's shocking. It's shocking how tolerant we are of it in our society. Let me give you a terrible example of sexism built into our structures. It's a wonderful woman from Wollongong, Dr. Karen Williams, who's a psychiatrist, who gets paid to treat people with PTSD by the taxpayer. We pay her to treat PTSD because she's good at it and it works. And most of the people she treats are former soldiers, or former or current soldiers and emergency service professionals, brackets, most of whom are men. And she tells this incredible story, which I'll just do a short version of. It's horrible, but it's so important. We, the taxpayer, pay her to help ambulance workers recover from the trauma of treating women who've been beaten to death. And we don't pay her to help the women who've been beaten. Because when you acquire PTSD through your occupation, we have occupational insurance. And she doesn't mind helping these people, to be crystal clear. She'd just like to help more people. But we will pay her and other psychiatrists to help people who get their PTSD watching trauma, and we're not rich enough to pay her and other people with her skills to help people who endured the trauma. That's how broken we are.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going...
That was cheery, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I've got one more question. Sorry.
Okay, we've got one more question.
Yes. Hi, Lisa. Hi. And really always enjoy listening to you speak. You always make it seem so simple, the solution. But yesterday we talked about pressure points and acupuncture, where you could do one thing in this sort of area. And for me, the pressure point is the media, like the monopoly of the media. How can we change that to get the stories out that you spoke about today?
Oh, never ask an economist questions like that. No, I mean, you're better off talking to people like Dee about that. But I've got an enormous amount of media attention for these things over the years, and we haven't fixed them. I'm not saying anything today I haven't said a dozen times before. And our society is kind of comfortable with all the truth I've dropped on you today, but it's not comfortable with that truth being called out in the way that I did today. So I think that, yeah, asking is really important, but I would always add to the ask a compare. You can't afford to do this. You reckon you can't afford to do that. My kids want me to take them to Disneyland. I don't want to take them to Disneyland. So I just lie to them and say we can't afford to. No, that's okay, because in my household I'm allowed to paternalistically, literally paternalistically, lie downwards to my children. That's not how democracy's supposed to work. When our leaders tell us we can't afford something, just decode that as I'd prefer to do something else. Don't ever let them say can't afford. They're choosing to do something else.
I think it's important to note that the priorities and values of a country, they flow down from the people who've got the power, and until very, very recently, those were all blokes. We're talking judges, we're talking politicians. That is changing, and the only way it is going to change is with more women in Parliament, with more women in the High Court. So it's a slow change, and but it is changing.